So I find it interesting, before I introduce our panelists here, and let them tell a little bit about their areas, but as we talk about Virginia's diverse energy strategy, Barry was very instrumental in his team in putting together a very diverse panel. And so as you hear about what sectors they represent, let me just also add to it, and you can read the detailed bios later, that we each represent geographically different areas of the state. We represent different market spaces. We represent large, small, and academia. And as well, one thing I would add as you read the bios, that we also represent just about every major university in the Commonwealth of Virginia in one form or fashion. From University of Virginia to James Madison, Virginia Tech, and then Virginia Commonwealth and William & Mary. So a pretty diverse panel that was put together. But let me start off and have John introduce and say a little bit about what you're doing, and then we'll go around the panel.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. I guess it's still morning. I'm John Williamson, and I'm chair of the board of RGC Resources, which is an energy holding company headquartered in Roanoke. One of our major subsidiaries is Roanoke Gas Company, which is a local natural gas distribution company. And I was CEO of that organization for about 16 years. And another asset of RGC Resources, which I think is interesting for this discussion, is that we are a small but a co-investor in the Mountain Valley Pipeline project, which will be one of the major interstate transmission pipelines, hopefully built through Virginia in the very near future. So look forward to participating in the panel.
Go ahead, Ollie.
Excuse me. I apologize for my voice and the cold I have. I'm Ali Haqiqat. I'm professor and director of nuclear engineering program at Virginia Tech. The reason I'm here partly is I'm chairman of the board of a new organization called Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium, nonprofit organization, which was established in January 2015 under Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium Authority, which was formed by the former governor under the state government. So VNEC, in short, is an organization that is formed by industry members and academia. And it's in operation, as I said, almost a year or 9 months. Our mission is expansion, enhancement of nuclear industry in Virginia, enhancement and investment and expansion of nuclear energy, engineering, research, and education. And also we try to serve as advocacy for this nuclear industry. And we try to work with entities beyond, obviously, Virginia. For example, recently we, together with Nuclear Energy Institute, which is a industry, I think, what do they call it, lobbyist for the nuclear industry. We are forming a conference June 6th, this month, I believe. It is in Richmond, actually. Yeah, it is in Richmond. And it's called Virginia Nuclear Summit, the first Virginia Nuclear Summit. And we invite you all to participate in this meeting. And we have a booth actually outside, and please stop by to get more information. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Tyson.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Tyson Ut, Director of Development for the Mid-Atlantic region with Apex Clean Energy. We're based in Charlottesville, Virginia. I have about 200 professionals at Apex these days, really focused on developing, constructing, and operating clean energy projects, both wind and solar, but primarily wind. Our mission at Apex is to accelerate the shift to clean energy. And as an example in how we're doing that, last year in 2015, Apex built more wind in the US than any other private developer. While we're based here in Virginia, most of that work is in other states, much of it in the Midwest, Oklahoma and Texas, but that more than 1 gigawatt of wind energy represented more than a $2 billion investment in those states. And so we're definitely interested in today talking more about how we can do some of that work here in Virginia and help advance the conversation towards how wind can play a role in this portfolio.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Danny on the end here.
All right, good morning. Danny Van Cleef, I'm president of Coronal Development Services. We're a utility scale solar development firm based also in Charlottesville, about a 9-iron from Apex. And much like the Apex team and business model, we develop nationally. We focus exclusively on large-scale solar, which is one distinction. We currently have a 500 megawatt portfolio that is either operational, under construction, or will be built by the middle of next year. Also, like Apex, we have gone out of state a fair bit to pursue our work where it makes sense, primarily serving utilities for the last 7 or 8 years. And the economics have to work for solar to become a part of their portfolio. So we have pursued work in a dozen states, and until very recently that did not include Virginia. But the timing of this panel is excellent because we are working now in Virginia on some large-scale solar projects. There's a shift that's taken place in the market. Solar now has a seat at the table, and our team that's, for the most part based here in Virginia is really thrilled to actually be working in the Commonwealth.
Excellent, excellent. So as you've heard, we have nuclear, natural gas, wind, solar. We don't have a couple covered like offshore oil or uranium mining or tidal or wind or wave energy, but you're going to hear a little bit in the conversation today about how there are commonalities across all of them, and yet there are differences. And so I'd like to kind of start off with John over here on my far right, and a little bit about today what is really becoming, and you heard earlier about the transition from coal, largely in the United States, over to natural gas as the major supply. So John, give us a little bit of insight about transmission capability here in the Commonwealth, maybe a little bit about how do we increase the utilization of natural gas in an increased manner here?
Okay. Well, first part of your question, and that of transmission. Virginia, for all of my career at least, has been natural gas transmission capacity constrained. Essentially, there was the Transco pipe going up the middle of the state, and then Columbia had a pipe going up the western part of the state, which sort of wrapped around and served a little bit of the Tidewater area. But places like Virginia Beach, for years, had difficulty getting adequate capacity. And that was just for industrial, commercial, and residential use. When we started talking about converting from coal to natural gas, the constraint issue got, I think, critical in Virginia. There are now, as you probably read, 2 major pipelines proposed, transmission pipelines, to bring natural gas either into and through Virginia. The one that I'm most familiar with, Mountain Valley Pipeline, will come down through West Virginia and then down by Roanoke and interconnect with the Transco pipeline. It will both bring increased natural gas to southwestern Virginia for local markets and distribution, but importantly tie into the Transco pipeline, which will not only increase transmission capacity and natural gas capacity and volume in the state, but essentially up and down the entire eastern seaboard. You may have heard recently the Constitution pipeline was turned down by the New York, essentially the governor of New York. There is dramatic natural gas capacity constraint into the Northeast. These pipelines will not only serve Virginia, but will provide natural gas capacity for generation of electricity in the Northeast and up and down the eastern seaboard. They are also bringing significantly reduced cost gas to Virginia. You have heard, I assume, of the Marcellus Shale and the miracle of shale horizontal drilling and fracking. In 2009, we were buying natural gas at $14 a decatherm in the summer. That was unheard of. Ordinarily, natural gas peaked in the winter and went down in the summer. That's about the time that we really began to see a serious conversion of electric generation from coal to natural gas. Turned the market absolutely upside down. We were talking about importing up to 20% of the supply of natural gas as LNG. Well, that world is completely turned around. We're talking about exporting it now. And I looked this morning, the natural gas price close yesterday was $2.15 a decatherm. That's from $14 in 2009. It's an unbelievable change, a rare opportunity for economic growth in Virginia as a result of reduced energy prices. And of course, I'm a gas guy, so for direct application of natural gas in end use, which is more efficient than electric generation, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back and forth between our different markets here. And so a little bit on the wind side. Wind has certainly been in the news here a lot, certainly with the offshore opportunities, and as you mentioned, even the onshore opportunities, and about leveraging those here and developing them and advancing them in Virginia. So give me a little flavor about how does wind play in this all-of-a-kind strategy here in Virginia?
Sure, absolutely. I think that there's perhaps still a bit of a mindset that wind and perhaps solar are still alternative sources of energy. I think that what we've seen in the progression in these technologies the last few years is really that they are mainstream technologies now. In 2015, there was more wind installed than any other energy source. I think we heard from Tom Kuhn it was about a third between solar, wind, and natural gas. But wind is certainly a mainstream player at this point. There are 20 states now, I think, that have more than 5% of their power coming from wind energy. So I think that it has that important role that it can play increasingly in a state's portfolio like Virginia. One of the key benefits really being the fact that you have no fuel cost for a source like wind energy. And so it naturally plays a hedge in fluctuating fuel prices. Hearing the examples of how those fuel prices can change over time, when you're thinking long-term and planning as a state and looking 10, 15 years down the road, it's nice to have a resource that will have no fuel cost for decades to come and help provide some certainty in that fuel mix as a balance.
Excellent. So at my company, we build aircraft carriers and submarines that utilize nuclear power. And so Ollie is representing several fronts, both from the academic perspective as well as in the industry perspective, the nuclear industry. And so how would you assess the current situation of nuclear? Where is it going in Virginia?
Okay. Well, let me actually go back one step. Where the electricity come from in Virginia? What's the fraction of different sources of electricity? I think currently, I read before coming here, 36% is gas, 35% is nuclear, 20 is coal. And so if you add these, you got 35, it's a 61, plus 20, that's 81. Is it correct? Yeah. 71 plus 91%. 91% of our electricity come from these three sources. And so the renewables are about 7%, and the rest are petroleum and other things. So that's the first thing I want to set the stage here, because I think that's sometimes missed in our discussion about renewables. I'm all for it. I'm a nuclear engineer, and obviously I've been in this discipline 30 years, so I have a strong bias for it. However, we have to be realistic when we talk about energy sources. If 90% of our electricity come from the three sources I just mentioned, which is fossil and nuclear, then the question here, how do we convert, if we really want to move on the renewables, how do we do that? It cannot be done overnight. That's impossible. And it cannot be said that we somehow magically convert all electricity to renewables, because I don't think is possible. That's really, I can basically state that very comfortably. Excuse me. So that's really, I think that's the first thing. I think we have to appreciate that, and that these percentages are very similar in nationwide. The nationwide nuclear is a bit lower, is like 20%. However, in principle, they are similar. About over 90% come from these three sources. So that's the first thing. Now, going back to nuclear as an educational front or as an industry, so nuclear energy, it's relatively speaking, is maybe still is a young industry. Maybe people talk about it. It's about 50-year industry. It came off of a very unfortunate situation, which is dropping a bomb, and that's I believe that was a major difficulty. It is a major difficulty with our industry. We have a bad image, and I know it, and I try to always explain it. And we also have a problem with education. Not many people really appreciate what this technology is and what it can do for us as a nation, as humanity, basically. I believe, obviously, it's a very important technology, and we need to really invest on education. Education includes public, which is actually one of the things we would like to do through VNEC, to really engage the public to understand what this technology is. What is good and what is bad about it, because really we have to, as a community, we have to decide, do we want this technology? And if we want it, we need to invest on it. And education is critical for really having an excellent technology. As you have in Newport News, Nuclear Navy has outstanding record of running reactors. As you know, these are reactors in the sea, and they have excellent record. And so it means that the technology is a sound technology, and the major barrier we have is really properly educating people and also educators like myself. We need more people, more nuclear engineers. We need more nuclear programs in the country. I mean, Virginia Tech, as an engineering school, did not have a nuclear program until 6-7 years ago. It used to have one, but they closed it in 1985. And that's really unfortunate. As a technical school, we need to have very strong education and training when it comes to any engineering, particularly nuclear engineering, which the state of Virginia highly dependent on it. One last thing I said, stop me anywhere you want. It's the state of Virginia is actually, when it comes to nuclear, is one of the key states in the United States. We have vendors like Areva, BMW, General Electric, obviously Newport News, and Dominion, which produces power for us. There are not many states, I can tell you, that have so many nuclear entities in the state of Virginia. And amazing, we did not have any nuclear engineering program until a few years ago. Currently, us and VCU has a program also. So that's really all it is. And my request is really having more investment in nuclear engineering education, obviously industry also, but particularly education side that you mentioned. Thank you.
So both an industry and an academia look at nuclear, and so let me switch over to, obviously being impassioned about that industry. So I'll switch over to the solar industry for a second. So here in Virginia, recently, in a survey done last year by the Energy Information Administration, Virginia ranked 33rd in renewable energy production. And so, as Ali brought up, so we're at about somewhere between 7 to 10% range of renewable energies. So, Danny, in your mind, what role do you see in terms of partnerships, in terms of businesses and government, about how to drive development in this renewable and specifically in the solar industry.
Okay, sure. And I was looking at a similar statistic focused on how Virginia ranks in solar, and I think over the last 3 years it's been very similar, somewhere between 29 and 32nd in the union, which obviously pains our team being a Virginia solar development shop. But I think the winds of change are already blowing here, and I mentioned that in my opening remarks that solar has a seat at the table today. And so it's less about what needs to be done in the future and more about an observation of what we already see happening. And in a regulated electricity market like Virginia, it certainly requires leadership positions from the investor-owned utilities, and Dominion in particular has made some large announcements. And Dominion's programs, which includes a goal of 400 megawatts of solar developed by 2020, represents a tremendously huge nominal increase in the megawatts that are installed here. I think today it's about 25 or 30 megawatts installed in the state. 400 megawatts by 2020 is a huge jump, and some of that will be developed by third parties like our team. So that to me is one of the major market movers. Additionally, you mentioned public-private partnerships. Governor McAuliffe announced a program, a goal of 110 megawatts of power purchase agreements signed between the Commonwealth of Virginia and developers of solar, which represents about 8% of the energy needs for government buildings, and again just creates the opportunity for our business model to participate here. So we're seeing that happen in real time.
Excellent. So one of the drivers, and we certainly see it in the solar and in the wind energy arena, maybe more so than what we believe we see in the nuclear and even in the natural gas, is technology. So I'll kind of start and go backwards here. How do you see investments in technology a driver in your industry, but specifically, how does it help the Virginia climate?
Okay, it's an interesting question. I'll steal from another speaker I heard recently who described from the perspective of the solar industry, the technology has really undergone an evolution, not a revolution. We're dealing with technology that's very well understood and hasn't fundamentally changed all that much since the first solar cells were developed. So for us, it's been about cost reductions of the same technology. And since 2006, the average installed cost of the solar power plants dropped by 73%. And so again, I think it comes down to the fundamental economic case. And solar is competing with conventional sources in a number of markets already, and it's going to continue to. We're going to continue to see that happen. I think coast to coast. And I think Virginia will be no different. Dominion's last IRP identified solar as the most cost-effective manner of meeting new demand while keeping an eye on federal carbon policy. Dominion's also been working to set a market index rate for solar that demonstrates to ratepayers and the SEC that solar is a very economic decision for resource diversification and fuel diversity. So I think that wave, as I mentioned a few times, is already coming ashore here in Virginia.
So one of the things, and my boss always reminds me when I was technology chief for our company, that the history of propulsion, again, I'm C guy, was, started off with wind, right? And then it went to combustibles and steam, and the translation of steam first from coal and then now to nuclear. And then as well, we used, compressed natural gas as well. My boss keeps telling me, so when are we going to have a solar-powered aircraft carrier? And I keep going, well, we have to have a fundamental translation of the capability of solar. And I think many in America are kind of waiting for the next phase, right? So it's kind of plateaued a little bit, and people are waiting for the next technological advance. So let me switch to wind. So where's wind going technology-wise?
That's a great question because it really, I think, gets to the heart of part of why wind is competitive. It's technology-based. It's not fuel-based. You can as fast as you can manufacture wind turbines and find sites to place them in the ground and start generating is as fast as you can start adding them to the grid. That certainly, from a developer's perspective, leaves a responsibility on us to find the right sites to install the technology. But we're seeing this proliferation throughout the country. So that, I think, technology-based side, I think, is really an advantage for the technology. In recent years, there was a Lazard analysis that was issued a few months back that cites how the cost of wind's come down about 60% in the last 6 years. And there's certainly commodities factors that play into that, but at its core, it's the technology evolution and the ability to generate more power from each turbine that's produced. At this point, we're seeing turbines able to produce 750 or more homes worth of electricity per turbine. And if you put 150 turbines into one project, it's meaningful. And back to the issue of trying to find the right sites to place that new technology, that's really where our core business is located. And here in Virginia, we're developing a site called Rocky Forge Wind out in Botetourt County, about 30 miles north of Roanoke, and really finding the evaluation and siting assessments to go into identifying that as an appropriate location for this technology. That would be the first project in Virginia. So it absolutely is technology enabled, and I'm glad you asked that question.
So the size of the wind turbine, how many megs?
Yeah, so in that case, it's in the design process. It's at the state for permitting currently. That project's designed for up to 25 wind turbines. It would probably produce enough power up to 20,000 homes worth of electricity. These are large-scale turbines, up to 550 feet in height. But each one, being sited in a pretty remote private tract of land with on-site transmission to connect to the Dominion system and broadly delivered throughout Virginia. It's a situation where we're able to find an appropriate site that's been assessed, studied, thankfully endorsed by a number of groups, including the Roanoke Sierra Club and Appalachian Voices and others. But that's a case where, in Virginia, I think because of the technological advancements that you mentioned, they've brought costs down. Now wind has a role to play in a state that hasn't seen wind play a role prior. So it's an opportunity to bring it to Commonwealth and see how successful it can be.
Excellent, excellent. Just have to design for those hurricanes here.
And Pete, before you leave the renewable side of the bench, we both talked a lot about the cost reductions and the advancement of our industries as a result of that. And we get this question a lot, and we ask this question of ourselves: is there another technology revolution that's coming? Is it going to be a higher efficiency module? And the theoretical efficiencies of these modules are already being approached, so that's not really where it's going to come from. I think what we're excited about and are actively participating in developing is solar plus grid scale storage. So battery storage is certainly something that I would be remiss in not mentioning. If you ask a question about technology and how it impacts our industry, grid scale storage is going to be potentially more revolutionary than evolutionary. So I just didn't want to leave that off the panel this morning.
Well, it's excellent. And the cyber conversation earlier today really relates to that as well, about the ability to protect it. So switch over to nuclear. So let's talk about nuclear new technologies. So how about small modular reactors? How about fission reactors? They're in the press today.
You mean fusion?
Fusion, excuse me.
Well, very good question. Actually, Virginia could have been the first to build a small modular reactor by Babcock and Wilcox, which is now BWXT. I guess, unfortunately, they stopped it, at least my understanding, temporarily. It's called Empower, which I actually, excuse me, I had a research project working with them. But in short, small modular reactors are significantly lower power. Like the one Empower was 180 megawatt versus 1,000 megawatt the large reactors are. They are outstanding. They have certain features that from safety point of view, from location, positioning, where you put in near population. They are called integral reactors because certain things inside the vessel, so therefore they can They eliminate some of the major accidents such as loss of coolant, large break. And so therefore, I believe there are very good technology to be pursued. But there are other things going on in the nuclear industry. Actually, Department of Energy has had for the last 25 years or so invested on different type of reactors. Higher temperature, so you can get higher efficiency. You can use, for example, talking about hydrogen generation, which was one of the applications for electric cars. We were talking fuel cells. And better fuel performance, issues of waste, what we call improved waste forms and so there are a set of reactors, unfortunately, are all paper design, what I call paper reactors, because we haven't built any. And that's a major issue we have in the United States, in my opinion. We are not building. We have 100 reactors operating. I don't know if everybody knows about this, by the way. I think most of the time I ask how many reactors we have. They say, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we do have 100 reactors in the United States operating, which is about 1/4 of reactors in the world, as far as technology is concerned. So we at Virginia Tech have to plug in. We have an initiative on a different type of reactors, which is called accelerator-driven subcritical molten salt reactor. There's so many attributes to that, and the reason is because we want to attack all the issues that at least either perceptive or is it true concerning nuclear power, which is include nuclear waste, because this reactor we don't really need enriched fuel. Is basically any type of fuel, natural uranium you can put in. Issues of nuclear security safeguard, we don't do enrichment, we don't do reprocessing. And also is highly modular. It has potentially better safety features. And so we are trying actually to push on completely somewhat revolutionary type rather than evolutionary that is going on within the existing reactor technology. So there is a lot going on actually, and however we are not building. I think that's really the key is we need to start building these reactors.
So this is right out of Back to the Future, the Mr. Fusion on the back of the DeLorean.
So the fusion, I somehow skipped it.
Yeah.
The reason is in the early 80s, I took a course as a graduate student. I was a fission side. And the fusion side, I took a course in fusion. And the professor said, 25 years. Every time I talk to the group, they still tell me 25 years. But let me tell you one thing. My opinion about fusion is a technical opinion, personal opinion, is the difficulty with fusion, we're trying to create sun on Earth. The environment that the sun has, we literally try to create it on Earth. So there are issues, there are highly technical issues that the technology has. Otherwise, if it works, it's very good. But fission technology, it's working. It's actually outstanding if we can really properly invest on research and development and actually building. With the last one that I've always been saying that we design a lot of nice reactors on computers, but not really building.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about technology advancements, and those advancements in the nuclear arena are as much for advancing the capabilities as well as protection and safety. So John, in your arena, what are we advancing? How are we taking care of some of the safety concerns associated with pipeline explosions, things of that nature?
Well, two questions. First, I'll comment just ever so briefly on the technology. Part of the drop in natural gas prices from $14 to $2 is the application of technology, essentially directional drilling and fracking, and then about a 30 to 40% improvement in the efficiencies of end-use appliances. But to your core question, and that of safety, anytime you're moving a fuel in a pipeline under the street to people's homes, safety becomes an issue. And you know, we saw the San Bruno incident in California. The good news in Virginia is, sort of like you, a little bit of a personal bias, but I think Virginia may be one of the safest and most advanced states in the country relative to natural gas pipeline safety. The infrastructure in Virginia started with cast iron, you know, after the turn of the century, up until about the 50s, and then it switched to bare steel, and then to coated steel, and then to plastics and related corrosion protections. The government in Virginia, particularly the State Corporation Commission, has a very both aggressive and professional pipeline safety operation, more so than almost any state that I'm aware of. And the legislature in Virginia has been pretty, I won't say pretty progressive, very progressive in terms of recognizing that laws needed to change to provide cost recovery for pipeline safety and pipeline replacement. So as a result of that, I think every major natural gas company in the Commonwealth has had a program for replacing older pipe with new corrosive protected pipe and or plastic with dramatically improved monitoring systems. My particular company, Coronal Gas Company, has been in a pipeline replacement program for about 25 years, and by the end of this year, there will be none of the old cast iron and bare steel pipe left. We'll be one of the first companies in the country that had that pipe to start with to be 100% renewed. So the streets of Virginia, I think, are the safest in terms of conduct of natural gas through pipe systems. It's been a wonderful thing to see, given where we were 25 years ago. So from a public policy standpoint, Virginia has been very much on the forefront on that.
Good. So we've talked a little bit about markets. We've talked about technologies. So let's kind of wrap up our session here and talk a little bit about policy, as John just mentioned. And in particular, if there was one policy change that could remove barriers that you have in your market spaces towards energy development or investments or the generation of jobs, in your mind, what would that be? So I'll start with Ollie. Didn't want you to go sleep.
Well, I think our major issue with, I believe, if we could, in some way we have a policy, but we are not pursuing it properly, is nuclear waste. And actually, I normally call it used nuclear fuel because truly this is not waste. I don't know, let me just plug in what, so if you look at what is called nuclear waste, 95% of it is uranium. It actually can be used, 95% can be reused. So only 5% really is what we call waste. So that's a major issue that we have, realization and understanding. I think in early 80s, or rather when Jimmy Carter was president, unfortunately I liked Jimmy Carter, but I didn't like his policy. I was stopping reprocessing capability and technology in the United States, which we gave it away to others very nicely, and they took it up and they are doing it. We are not reprocessing any fuel. We just keep all the fuel. These are major resources, and we are considering, we call them waste. And that's wrong, obviously. So that's, if we really want to move this technology, this waste policy or nuclear, how do we deal with this is an important issue. And I believe there are rules and there are policies, but we are not really properly following. The United States government owes the industry to take away what they call waste, the fuel, the spent fuel, to find a repository.
So this is a whole hour's worth of conversation, by the way.
Yeah,
Called
that's right.
Yucca Mountain and waste
That's right.
isolation plant. So let me move over to Tyson. Your thoughts?
Well, there's certainly a whole slew of things that could be done, I think, to encourage more installations of wind energy in particular. One thing I'd want to point out is that the production tax credit that was extended at the federal level and based upon how much electricity is actually produced by the facility, when it was extended, it was actually designed to phase out over the next 5 years. So I think we need to look and plan more long-term as an industry and this whole energy economy side in terms of where are we headed policy-wise long-term, and the fact that you do have technologies like wind, when you assess them on an unsubsidized basis, they're pretty competitive with other sources. And right now, in fact, gas, wind, solar are the most competitively priced when you remove subsidies across the board. So I think that similarly, we might want to look at what's a long-term plan for phasing out subsidies that have just overly complicated the energy market and have made it difficult to really compete in a truly balanced and level playing field.
Yeah. And as well, the Europeans and Asians are also heavily subsidizing. It makes it even harder for us to compete within our own country. So, John?
Thank you. There actually is one, and it'll take me a moment to set it up. I won't take it long, but natural gas is best used as an end-use fuel, whether it's heating hot water or heating space or in a manufacturing application. And we've missed, I think, in the Commonwealth and nationwide, but particularly in the Commonwealth, a significant potential to make better use of natural gas and better use of electricity by promoting more direct end use of natural gas. And in particular, where it's had, I think, the worst impact is in low and moderate income housing. And maybe let's just say moderate income housing. The typical 2,000 square foot, 1,500 square foot house that's built and sold today is built and sold as cheaply as possible. And the way you do that is to put an electric furnace in a closet and an electric furnace and or a heat pump wherever you can put it. And so you have no ventilation, exhaust, and nothing, no piping through the roof and no plumbing associated with natural gas delivery. So as a result of that, you set that home up to be more costly to operate for the next 40 or 50 years as opposed to having spent another $4,000 or $5,000 and installed gas water heaters and gas direct use furnaces. So it's very much a sub-optimization. And it creates, particularly on the heat side, it creates a winter spike on electric production and electric cost. I think the legislature and the State Corporation Commission in Virginia ought to adopt a policy that will allow for some sort of subsidization to put direct end use gas in those lower income homes and allow a cost recovery system, either have the gas utility pay for it and then recover it in rates in some fashion. But we've really sub-optimized the use of our energy in the Commonwealth as a result of that and driven up the energy costs of those that could least afford to pay it.
Excellent thoughts. So I'll leave the future solar. Last comments to Danny.
All right, I'll be brief as we're right at the end of the time together. And I wish that I had an answer that felt really novel. But I'll just sort of offer up some benchmark policy, some enabling policy that we've seen that have really spurred the development of solar in other markets. And there's a great benchmark just to our south in North Carolina. The state government there really wanted to spur the green collar economy in North Carolina, bring in those jobs, that vocational training, and create that industry there and put a state tax credit in place. And if you look at the rankings for installed solar capacity the last 3 years, it's 1, 2, California, North Carolina, and then Virginia's down towards 30. So the impact of that tax credit has been phenomenal, and that would be one very obvious enabling policy. The second, which we've also seen, would be a mandatory renewable portfolio standard in Virginia as opposed to a voluntary one. If you have a mandatory RPS that has some teeth in it, you create maybe a carve-out for solar, you create an additional market for an additional revenue stream, which is renewable energy credits, and that helps really spur investment in solar facilities. It helps make the economic case arrive that much faster. I think both of these mechanisms help jumpstart. They're not training wheels that you need on the industry long term, but they do help quickly close the gap economically, and we've seen them used quite effectively. The RPS markets like Maryland and New Jersey are examples of that variety. So,
excellent. So before I turn it back over to Barry, I would just highlight again, as you've heard about the market spaces here and you've heard about diversity out in our exhibit area, all of those technologies, capabilities, markets, and more. So do make sure, if you haven't stopped by, to make sure you talk and glean the information that you desire to get out of this